if I was to tell a story about my experiences with racism, it probably wouldn't be that interesting because nobody wants to hear a creamy white, just glass of milk white guy talk about how racism has affected their lives. Hey everybody, my name is Brendan Kennedy. This is my YouTube channel, The BK Stank, and today we are talking about storytelling. Now I feel like we've all been around people who, for the love of God, do not know how to tell a story, and instead of it being this like magical shared experience for everybody, it just becomes this really uncomfortable thing where you're just waiting for them to get to the fucking point. So today, we are going to be talking about a few things that you can do to make your stories better, whether you're a comedian or not. Now, if you are a comedian, I think you'll get a lot out of this. If you're not, hopefully the next time you're at a cocktail party, you'll be able to hold everyone's interest, get to the cool part of your story, and then let somebody else talk. One thing that I think literature and storytelling have in common is that it's really important that you figure out who the person telling the story is, for a variety of different reasons. Number one, I think that knowing who you are and how you fit into the world around you makes for a better story. If I was to tell a story about my experiences with racism, it probably wouldn't be that interesting because nobody wants to hear a creamy white, just glass of milk white guy talk about how racism has affected their lives. So it's important to know how you fit in. Also, I think just as a character yourself, when you're going to be telling a story, are you going to be somebody who is taking a point of view that's a little bit more aggressive? Are you going to be kind of lighthearted? Were you just really drunk at the time? And so this is all coming back to you in foggy shades of what the fuck happened that night. Nobody knows. So I think it's important to think about that sort of stuff. Also, I think for storytelling, it's important to be your most authentic self. So if you're performing something and maybe you combine a few events that happened in your life and you weave them together into one specific cohesive story, I think that's fine. I have no gripes with that. But if you're creating a bunch of stuff that didn't happen, or maybe it happened to some other people, it's not going to seem right. The people listening to you are going to know that something's a little off. I always tell people, be yourself. Unless you're kind of an asshole, then maybe be somebody else. Now, the other thing that people should think about when telling a story is to emphasize what's important. Now, I think we've all seen that person who has had a really complicated journey or a vacation that was just every day. It was packed full of adventures, and then they come back home and it's terrible because instead of it being this magical journey of doing things and seeing new places and eating new food and all that sort of stuff, it just becomes this really lame itinerary where they say, yes, and then the second day we woke up early and then we had a really good breakfast and then we drove for a long time and the driving wasn't really good, but then once we finally got there, we knew why we had to drive. Just stop it. Pick out what's important, who the major players are, where you were that day, or just boil it down to one point. When I say to emphasize what's important, obviously try to pick one story that you want to tell, and then you want to think about the setting, the characters in play, and then the overall arc. Now, when I'm talking about the setting, I mean, what time is it? Both in your life, what time is it where something is happening, what part of the day, what year is it? I think it's a completely different story if you're talking about the first time you tried acid and it's 1967 and you're at a music festival, and yeah, that changes the meaning completely when it's 1997 and you're not at a music festival, you're in high school. So obviously, like I'm trying to say, the setting of where you are can completely change the context of what happened. At the same time, it might not be that important. Follow with me here. So if you have this really deep, soul-touching story where you talk about the time that your mother's boyfriend shot you in the face. It might not matter if it was 3:57 or 4:15. It might not matter if it was 74 degrees outside, partly cloudy, with a chance of rain. What is it adding to the story? What does it do to draw the person experiencing the story in, your audience? Is there something about it that hooks them and makes them need to hear what happened next? Or is it kind of superfluous and you think it adds detail, but then at the end of the day, the story is kind of the same with or without that detail? Who are the major characters of your story? Now, obviously, if you are climbing Mount Everest by yourself, no oxygen tank, then in that instance, really the only characters are probably going to be you and maybe the mountain itself. I think that if you have other characters in your story, which is perfectly fine, you should flesh them out. Make them seem more real life to your audience who's actually experiencing the story. And then at the same time, pick out what's important. So if you were going out on a first date and it was absolutely terrible, and you walk into a restaurant and the guy who brings you to your table is 7 feet tall, it seems like a weird detail, but unless you can actually make it tie in to the whole story, probably doesn't need to be a part of it. You want to think about the arc of the story. I think anybody who has had a friend with benefits has had that conversation. Where is this going? And I think that's what your audience wants at the same time. Not to necessarily have a lifelong relationship with you, with kids and a dog. What they really want is to know why they're sitting there hearing the story. Even Julius Caesar knew how to tell a good story and keep it brief. Veni vidi vici, I came, I saw, I conquered. And most of all, people want to know what your trials and tribulations are leading to. What is that breakthrough moment? Are you going to climb Mount Everest and then look out on top of the world and realize how small everything is? Or was the real Mount Everest inside all along? That doesn't make any sense. You can't have a mountain inside yourself. It'd be very uncomfortable. Now, for me as a stand-up comic, I think I kind of take some of this stuff and your basic English major knowledge of narrative, and I think there's some other things that have to come into consideration if you are a comedian or somebody who's actually trying to be funny when they tell their stories. So this might work if you're trying to put it into a presentation at work. This might just be if you're at a bar and somebody told a story that sucked and you need to one-up it because you're a dickhead. Number one, if you're thinking about telling a story in a stand-up situation, you have to think to yourself, is this funny? So there might be a situation where there was a lot of tension that happened to you and you might have experienced like a severe loss, and you think to yourself, I need to convert this through the medium of stand-up, this horrible experience, into something cathartic and funny that everybody can share. And I think if you're able to do that, that's amazing, and there's a real craft to it. It might be something you try a few different iterations on, and it might work and it might not work. But I think you need to find your way to make it actually funny. And I always say this, I think there's a lot of people who believe, they have that edgelord point of view where they think that comedy, a laugh is good, but a groan is just as good. And I myself, I don't believe that. I think that people have very complicated lives, and that if they actually come out to see a stand-up show, they're pretty cool. And I think you have to honor that as a performer. And you're not necessarily there to talk about how bad your life is or what makes you miserable. What your job there as a comedian is to make someone laugh. And if you have a story that's going to make someone laugh, it's probably worth bringing into your act. I think if you have a story where you're basically trying to bum the audience out and make them feel sorry for you, and then you talk about the fact that you're still there and you get an applause break. Like, applause breaks are cool, but I think comedy should be funny. I'm not talking about any stand-up special in particular, but I kind of am. I think there's two main ways that comedians incorporate storytelling into their act. One is what I call burying the lead, and that is, if you ever see Norm Macdonald, do me a favor right now, hit pause on this video and go look up The Moth Joke by Norm Macdonald. Basically what Norm Macdonald does is he does everything I just told you in the last few minutes of this video. He does it all wrong. He adds all the details, he incorporates other characters, and then when you get to the punchline, it's hilarious. I'm not saying that everybody can do this or that everybody should or that there's anything wrong with Norm Macdonald, because obviously Norm Macdonald is doing much, much better than I am. Now, the other point of view with storytelling in a stand-up context is that always comedy is brevity. So, why did the chicken cross the road? To get to the other side. You don't want it to be like, I remember back in 1997, I owned a poultry farm. Now, my daddy had owned a poultry farm, and poultry farms were what everybody in our neighborhood did. Now, you noticed one day that a chicken done got out of the pen. See how fucking terrible and tedious that felt? Like, I feel like I want to take a shower now after performing a knock-knock joke like that, or performing a why the chicken crossed the road joke. But yeah, don't drag it out if it needs to be. There is a comic I've met a couple of times named Mike Malone, who he just did he's just completed a new hour, and I'm not sure if he's still performing it, but I saw him talking about it on Facebook. And he said that for the first time this last hour that he's been performing, there's a lot of stories that are very like long form stories. And he said for him, he's never really been able to incorporate these like really kind of like long form bits into his act. And people are saying to him like, Mike, it seems like you got it down. How are you writing these long bits? And what Mike Malone actually said is he's just actually writing a bunch of short jokes and then stringing them together along the way. And I think one of my favorite comedians at this form of storytelling, what I call joke smuggling, is Mike Birbiglia. So obviously, Mike Birbiglia, he's been on This American Life a lot. He's been on, he's had a major motion picture come out. He had a Netflix stand-up special. And what he's really been able to do is take this storytelling style of stand-up comedy and incorporate it in little bits at a time into his act. He's been able to create a real niche for himself where nobody's really able to replicate what he's doing because they haven't lived his life. Now, at the same time, I feel like there is a finesse to this. You can have too many jokes. I remember I was actually, back when I was a younger comedian, I would do stand-up contests, and one of the grading criteria they had was number of jokes per minute, with the idea being that if you had a 5-minute set, you could plug in as many jokes as possible and you could get more laughs, and that meant you were a better comedian. The problem with this is something that Dan Harmon mentioned on his podcast. Obviously, if you're not familiar with Dan Harmon, he is the creator of Community. He's the creator, or one of the creators of Rick and Morty. Very good writer as far as TV shows. I was listening to his podcast, and one thing that he had mentioned is what they call a fish barrel. So the idea with a fish barrel is sometimes if you're writing jokes for a sitcom, you can have too many jokes back to back to back, where, if you're timing, if you just have one really good joke there, it works. But the second you try to put too many jokes in there, it starts to feel kind of corny, it starts to feel kind of forced, and it starts to take away from the individual punchlines that you're setting up with your jokes. So the trick with storytelling as a stand-up comedian, I think, is timing, which, as we all know, is the secret of comedy. But seriously, I think, yeah, this is one of those things that makes open mics so important. If you have the opportunity to write a joke, perform it 5 or 6 times, you will know how that joke is going to handle the 7th time you tell it. You know what to expect. And so this is the importance of, if you want to develop a bit as a long form story, you're going to tell a lot of jokes. There might be some that you love, there might be some that you're not as passionate about, but at the end of the day, you have to figure out which ones work best. And sometimes it's not always the ones that you love. Sometimes we have to kill our babies. Not Casey Anthony style, just cut jokes. So the reason I bring all this up is I have my own storytelling show that I'm able to host. Obviously, I'm not the only person who runs it. I work with a couple of good people, Deb Markham and James Roach, and they're actually helping us all put together this show at the Push Comedy Theater. So this is a show that I really love doing. If there's anything I take pride in, it's this show. Basically, it's kind of like The Moth. We have local actors, artists, storytellers, stand-ups come to the Push, and they get on stage and they talk about real experiences from their own life. I've seen some people bare their soul, and it's not always funny. I think I've seen some stuff that's really heart-wrenching, but what's real about it is the humanity. I think the fact that people are sharing their experiences, it resonates with the audience, and it's one of the most powerful things that you can be around for. So this show takes place on the 3rd Sunday of every month. This month, September, it's going to be on September 19th at 7:30 at the Push Comedy Theater on Granby Street in the Arts District of Norfolk. I highly recommend you guys come out and check it out. I, Brendan Kennedy, will be hosting it. All right, guys, my name is Brendan Kennedy. This has been the BK Stank. If you guys like this, please hit like. And if you really, really like it, you want to see more of this, please hit subscribe. Go ahead and hit the little bell icon so you know when you get these videos coming through. If you guys want to see me talk about something else in another video, go ahead and leave it in the comments below. And please share these videos, especially if you know somebody who doesn't tell a story well. You could always just put this in their inbox and be like, hey, I thought you might enjoy this, instead of boring every single person that we know. You're terrible. No one likes you. You don't have to say that. You can just send them this video. And if you got this video, you're fine. People are just trying to help. That's it for now. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.